Hi, I'm Matt from HockeyReviews.ca, and this is the Brian's GNetik V or 5 pad review. So we've done videos on the blocker as well as the catching glove, and they have their own separate reviews, so we won't be talking about those here. We're just talking about the Brian's GNetik 5, and normally I would do a video where I would talk about this one and then the old one, but unfortunately I sold my GNetik 4 set like over a year ago, and way before this line came out. So I can't talk about an old set because I couldn't find one either. Like locally I could just pick up and so I could do this video on. So this is gonna be a bit different because we're gonna do a review of this as well as compare it to the differences of the Optik 2 kind of side by side. So you get an idea of like which pad might work better for you and kind of like what the different features are between the two instead of just talking about this one straight out. So first of all, I have to say huge thank you to Brian's for sending me this set. And it's hard to see down here, but it is on the customization part. It's on the blocker and gloves. This is a demo set that they sent me. I reached out to them and said, hey, I would love to review your line. I have the glove already. I would just love to check everything else out. Is it possible for me to do it? And they were gracious enough that they let me do this. So huge thank you to them. Without them, this wouldn't have been possible. So before we jump into the review, if you want to support the channel and you live in the United States, make sure you check out the links in the description to Pure Hockey and Pure Goalie. Clicking those links and making a purchase gives me a kickback so I can make more content and do more real actual reviews. Otherwise, check out Patreon and buy me a coffee. Everything through there comes always back into the channel and helps support me make more content like this and do real reviews. It would be greatly appreciated. Right off the bat, I'm going to talk about sizing because I feel that's very important and people need to see that, and these two pads next to each other are a very good example of the sizing. So Brian's did something different with this pad, and they totally changed the boot of the pad and flattened it out a lot, which we'll talk about in the future in this video. But for the time being, sizing of this pad is, this is a 35+1, that's a 36+1, and they line up exactly. Now when we flip this around, the knee honestly also lines up pretty much exactly. This one does look a little higher. And when you wear them, they're basically exact and they fit the exact same way. I actually asked Brian for the 36+1 of this pad because that would give me a direct comparison. They only had a 35 for demos. Luckily, they gave that to me because it worked perfectly for my usage. So it definitely fits a size bigger than previous GNetik 4s. And it fits a size bigger than Optik 2s as well. And again, I'll talk about the boot and why that happens in a little bit. As you can see by these pad sizes, this is a 36+1. This is a 35+1. And my knees are basically on the exact spot. So ignore this because these are bulking up and kind of getting in the way. But you can see where my knees end up landing, basically right in the middle of both. But this is a full inch smaller of a pad. Because of that flattened boot, it did adjust the pad sizing on these. But when I go, for example, in the butterfly, they end up being very similar overall in size, and the Optik is like maybe just a slight touch larger here, and that's kind of what happened with their max core, just the shape, because this one is kind of straighter as you can see. But for sizing, you definitely have to go down a size on this. This is a 35, that's a 36, and I would recommend that for people who are looking at these and have had Optik 2s or Optik 1s or even GNetik 4s in the past. So the next best part to kind of show off on this pad would be the boot flex and the overall flex of the profile. So the boot on this is still super, super soft, and it's nice and soft like that. The boot on this pad is also very soft, but it's soft in like a different way, and it's kind of hard to explain unless you're actually using it yourself. When I flex this down, it doesn't ever feel like it hits a point where it hits something and stops. It just kind of like stops. With this, when you flex it, it feels like it hits a point where it's not moving anymore. So I feel like the flex on this feels like it's almost a more natural movement to your leg, and just kind of how like a thing would, I don't want to say a boot, but like how something would like kind of move with your leg. Where this one, it's soft, but then it just hits. So it's like it's almost an internal foam or something. It's just hitting something there and it won't go anymore. Where this one, it does have that point, but it's so much softer hitting there, and it doesn't feel like there's something getting in the way. And when you go it soft, it just kind of goes all the way, where this one, it just hits it and just dies. So this one definitely has a much softer boot than what is on the Optik 2. So for flex on basically above the knee and everything, I have to call out to begin with, my Optik 2 is a max core with a pro stiff thought. Like in here, I got a pro stiff option. I think it's what Garrett Sparks orders in his pads or something like that. regardless, it's a bit stiffer than a max core up here, because when I saw a max core, I wanted to go even more stiff than that. And this is kind of what I got for that. When we talk about the stiffness on the GNetik V, this is where they made a pretty big difference. And this is where they include their Bri core. Again, I'm going to overlay an image of what the Bri core looks like from Brian's website. Basically, they're using some sort of composite in between foams or something like that, or polycarbonate, whatever it is. It's up in here to stiffen this up, and it does add a few things to it. One, it's actually the core stiffness across here, which is stiffer, and I'll show that off in a separate view. So with that new core in there, we look and we flex this down. You can see that is pretty stiff, especially up here. It's keeping it pretty straight, and something that you might not be used to seeing. And a GNetik pad, because the 4s were definitely softer, especially if you broke them in a lot, they could get a lot softer. I always kept mine straight up and straight, and I never pushed down once on it. So my thighs were like played pretty stiff because I never broke that down at all. It wasn't as stiff as I'd prefer, but it was still pretty stiff. This is definitely on a next level. So obviously this, because of this, it is stiffer than what a previous one is. But one thing I do want to call out here, and something I noticed, and I have noticed on this pad too, is that these pads do break in, and all pads will break in. And what I mean by that is when I got this out of the box, I was the first person to use these. They're still in their plastic, basically wrap and bag when they came to me. And when I got out of the box and went like this, there was zero flex whatsoever. It was crazy stiff. This was way stiffer than what my Optiks were right out of the box. Now, after using it, I think I used them about 6 times. You can see there is some give to them, and this is flexing more than what it did out of the box considerably. So I didn't want to stick these upside down and really try to flex these because they're not my pads. And I didn't want to break a demo set and be a total jerk about that and like stick these upside down and see what curve they would get or anything like that. And I didn't want to break them or cause damage to them, so I didn't do that. But I have a feeling like these would be able to hold a decent shape because of how stiff they are, and also just because like it does have some give to it, and it has gotten softer since I took them out of the box. So if you do want like a curve or something like that, this might be okay with that. Now, also with that said, Brian's is the custom goal company for a reason. You can custom these whatever you want for different flex stiffness. I think these ones were a stock one, which is set to a 1, 3, 4. So boot is a 4, 3, 1. The 1 is the most stiff possible. So again, if you're ordering custom Brian's, which again, custom goal company, you can order that with whatever you want. But right here, you do get a much stiffer thigh than what people might be used to. And when we compare it to my used, and these have had quite a bit of use in them, I will put that as a caveat. Optik 2 Max Core, the stiff, as you can see, but these are starting to flex a bit, and I've noticed these starting to flex a bit, but these have seen, honestly, quite a bit of usage, so they're not quite as close as to what they were stock. They were stiffer stock, and they're breaking down, but this stiffness ability is like a slightly more so than I would say here, but this pad is like, I think, over a year and a bit old, and my most used pad since basically like that timeline. So they are breaking down a bit, whereas this one is obviously brand new. I'm going to reiterate this basically with all pad reviews now, and we started with the factory mat. While there is a gap here, this is not really bending down. You can see it moving just ever so slightly at like the max of there. And right here, there's not a ton going on there. And it's not because the bottom is too soft, because this part does bend. You can see it bend in. It's without anything right here pulling the thigh down, that piece isn't going to move. So that's like doing that is fine. And even then there's the gap. There is contact like right here at the most part, like right here. But again, it's not really blocking the pad from flexing. If I do the strap to the calf, it's basically the same thing. The movement is basically the same there. So once again, while this is stiffened up, the rest of the pad down here is still pretty soft, and it still has that torsion flex, which we'll show in a second. But from like an actual pad standpoint, unless you put a piece right here, this thigh rise isn't going to come down, and the pad isn't really going to flex without something anchoring it downwards like this. So this is fine and works as intended for basically any pad without that strap. The boot on this pad compared to the Optik, it feels similar-ish when you kind of like push them down like I showed on the table. But when you actually wear them, I definitely feel like this one feels softer, because with the Optik 2, when you flex it downwards, it basically hits a point exactly and just stops. Where this one does give you a bit more movement, and you can't really, like, you can kind of see it flexing there a bit. And you really only feel it when you're really driving down into like posts and stuff, and when your legs are kind of like exploding out on pushes, but really it feels fine. It feels like a soft boot. It never gets in the way whatsoever when you're playing, and it kind of continues the GNetik line and feeling for that. Now onto the super important thing about this set, and specifically that is the graphics. Now, I actually really like the graphics on this pad. I think you can do some interesting zones and you can make it look clean, or you can make it look busy and everywhere in between. That said, there are a few places which I don't like at all, and it's specifically with the glove and the whole set. So the blocker and pads work like perfectly together as kind of expected. It's a perfect mimic of each other, at least from what I could tell, and I didn't miss anything. Like, you don't really get this line down here, but that's not really a big deal because it's just that weird mesh stuff, but the rest of it is like right on. Whereas the catching glove is totally different, and it's just position of like where this is totally opposite. So what we're gonna do really quickly is kind of show this side by side to get a better idea, because this is a mimic of the pad. This never really lines up. It's kind of the same way, right? So if you mimic this with this, you're kind of like here, but it doesn't really ever work when you look closely, like, because really when you do this graphic, and I did a custom one to kind of take a look at it, if say this was like a different color, say red, that would actually show up right here, and you can see the little black input right there. So that's not really where the whole thing would be, because it should be on the inside. So even if you're holding it like this, it's not going to be there. If you're holding it like this, it's not going to be there. If you're holding it like this, it's not going to be there. So that's kind of annoying, and something I had to do previously with my Optik 2 set, where I actually inversed the graphic. So I did custom blocker and pads were the same as each other, but the catching glove, I had to do basically the flip of what their customizer did, and I think it turned out pretty good and looked pretty good. And you can see it right here, where obviously it's not a one-to-one because this piece right here is right here, right? But when I hold it up in my stance, the blue is at the top and the red is more than enough on the outside, and then I did a red pocket to kind of make that seem like the same way. But my whole goal was basically this does the best I can do right there. Now I still think like this part should have been flipped, so it should have been kind of right here, but Brian does this thing where it tries to maximize the graphic on this portion and kind of minimize it everywhere else, which I understand. Kind of a bunch of companies are doing that, but I really don't understand why this was flipped, because like the only way to really do that the right way would be like this, and you're never doing that, or like this, and that's just weird. Like this is, I think, the exact way that this ends up working or looking similar, but this is how you hold your glove, right? So that's kind of annoying to me. Obviously not an important thing, but it is what it is. So starting on the pad face, again, now just not talking about graphics, you don't have bindings anymore here besides here. Brian's has been doing that for a long time now. They do kind of have these interesting little bumps right here, and they've been doing that for the GNetik for a while too, where they had like faux knee rolls, and it kind of continues here. It goes all the way up here, and it just has bumps here, and it's not important at all. It doesn't really do anything. I'm pretty sure it might affect rebounds slightly, but you never notice it. It's just an interesting touch that they've been continuing to do. So the other thing about this is super dead rebounds, except up there where it is a bit stiffer because of that core in the thigh. You can hear it, and it just holds up a little bit better overall because of the stiffness. But overall, very dead rebounds, and I'll overlay a bunch of shots of that while I'm talking about this. It's a very deadened pad, especially compared to the Optik. The Optik isn't a crazy pad by any means in terms of rebounds, but I noticed them come off a lot harder than what's on the GNetik. The GNetik is considerably softer. The other big difference here is that outer roll. So you do have your full kind of square. It's angled but squared, so it's skinnier in the inside. And if you take a look right here, you can kind of see it, how it's skinnier here, but then goes like full size over there. All the way on the boot as well is a little bit angled, but it's still kind of a generally square outer roll. And it's kind of stiff all the way through with the foam. It's like not that soft. Whereas the Optik 2 has a super tiny, useless outer roll that I meant to take off when I ordered these and put a full roll there, and I totally forgot, but super tiny inlaid roll that basically does nothing, as you can see, and kind of disappointing from the Optik side view, but more traditional and standard on the GNetik, and honestly it works pretty, like it's better. I've used it, and I've found times where pucks would hit this and kind of scoot over, where other pads like the Warrior G5 that has that cover edge, which has like the max size of this, actually does make a difference in terms of angles where pucks come off of. So I like that the GNetik has a roll there. It's a touch I think shouldn't be going anywhere. So the interesting thing about the boot here, when we take a look here, is it looks the same here all the way through, but when we flip it over, it's going to look different. This looks like basically identical between the two. This one honestly might look a little more shallow, but we flip it over and it almost looks like these are, like this one looks bigger. And I'm assuming this is playing some tricks on me or something, but right there does look bigger than it is right there. And honestly, it's pretty similar. But while this does look like deceivingly thicker and it doesn't really actually seem thicker overall, the one thing I do notice on this boot, and I talked about it with the boot flex, but when it goes like this, it definitely feels like it can move more and it flexes up more. So the boot itself flexes more. While this still moves, it definitely feels like it gets in the way. So I said it feels like foam gets in the way. Honestly, this part right here and then just kind of coming in, it kind of just feels like it gets stuck, where this one definitely feels like you can move it more and it keeps going, and the whole like kind of core and boot here is softer. So it does have that more flexibility there. Moving on to the side, you have, again, this does always look fatter just because of this roll, but really this is basically the same all the way through for thickness, but the pad still feels different, and we'll talk about that when I talk about the torsion of this pad. But everything here is honestly pretty similar, and even running up here, you still have a very thin pad all the way through. It again looks thicker because of this roll, but overall it's all pretty similar all the way through here. So the actual core and the size of everything there isn't very different. When we flip it on the other side, it's again pretty similar all the way through in terms of just overall design. And there are obviously a few differences here. One is this little calf is shorter than what this is. This kind of lax, keeps coming out a lot more for more of a wrap around your ankle. As you can see, the length of that one compared to this one. We'll take a look at this wing in a little bit. And then you do have a shorter piece right here. So you do have more of a room here for that flex downwards. But again, we talked about that previously, where that flex doesn't really do anything. This one right here is a longer plate, and that's kind of how flexible it is. It kind of does flex. This one is stiffer. So I don't know if they're using the Bri core in here, but that is a stiffer piece than what is on here. So that's pretty interesting to me that this has gone a stiffer route. This pad did feel very stable when I was on it, and it never felt like it was moving at all. So does this pad. And we'll again talk about that a bit more in a little bit. Knee blocks are similar design. This one is just angled a bit, and this one is just totally squared off. But again, you can see that gap here, and that gets in the way moving down. But again, we talked about that. So one other difference on here is this does have this is all one piece up here all the way through, and this is one piece here, and then the top is segmented on both of them. This part on here, so like the sliding edge, feels harder and more dense than what is on my Optik 2s. But the thing is, I don't know if this is just because I've been using them for so long and the foam has started to degrade, but all this does feel softer than what is on the GNetiks. As you can see, there's a give in there, and it's on the boot as well. Now, when using them and sliding in them, the GNetiks felt like they're ever so better, but I have a hard time really comparing these two because these ones are older. I would want to put two new ones next to each other side by side, but a harder edge right here will definitely help with that sliding. Both are obviously the Blue Primo. Little hard edge, I believe, is making that little bit of a difference for overall sliding on these. OptiSlide is good. It's not the best anymore. It is very solid though. This does not slide close to my Vaughn SLR3s, unfortunately, which technically is the same material, but they have a coating on it that makes it really, really slippery. That's still the slipperiest pad I've ever worn. And then Bauer's are still slightly better than this as well, especially on all ice conditions. This one is probably a little bit better than Bauer in super fresh ice, but once it gets choppy, the Bauer is better than what this is. But overall, it slides very well and basically third in the totem pole of overall pad sliding currently. We do have that sewn in knee block right here on both of them. I like that just so it helps durability and long lasting this so it doesn't kind of pull out. All right, so on to the super important toe ties, which obviously aren't that important, but these ones come stock with this nice little leather Gen Pro thing, like slack area, and then these elastic smart straps like this. Pretty simple design, goes in there, and that's it. It's a decent design. So I ended up replacing this, which came on my Optik 2s, with a Kineski one for a few reasons. One, this elastic isn't, or these, whatever this is, these cords, I find them a little thin and they tend to wear out faster than the thicker cord on other companies. It's not awful, it's just, it's not the best. And the other reason is, and this is the really annoying reason, is this thing is too annoying to get through my True Skates. So specifically, getting this through here is annoying. It does go in there, but it kind of get stuck and it's annoying when you have to reach down. The other annoying part is I put my straps through here on my true skates because I found that basically these toe ties, not these ones specifically, like all toe ties were getting chewed up through this little gap right here on my skate. And this piece right here was basically impossible to get through this strap. And it's super annoying. And for the sake of my toe ties, because of like this edge basically, and this isn't a problem of these pads or toe ties in general, it's a problem of these skates, but I had to do something to mitigate it. Pulls it through here, make sure that toe tie kind of comes here and not here, so it holds it in place a little bit better than if I just did it here. This obviously isn't a problem, like I said, of the Brian's one. And even though like the front part of this skate is still super annoying to get through, you can get through it. And I get that this is a nice strap and they probably paid a decent amount of money to make this a thing. Like it's not as cheap as just using a piece of Gen Pro. If you want to keep using these straps, please just include them, like include this with the pad. That would be really cool. And put it right there instead, because it's just annoying using this and putting it through the smaller and smaller holes that are going on these skates. Obviously, it's not the pad's fault and it's not Brian's fault. It's specifically True's fault and their stupid shift attack holder and how tiny the holes are and how this is. But it's just a small nitpick that, and like a quality of life thing I found that I feel would be greatly appreciated, because I always kind of get rid of these just because they're slightly annoying to use. Now the pads also do come with a boot strap as seen here. I took it off right away because I don't use boot straps. But before we get to the crazy change piece on here, we will just talk about the binding. It does have a toe binding all the way through, and this one is standard Gen Pro. Some of them, like you can customize it whenever you customize it. Mine was the Primo material on that, and for wear purposes it honestly doesn't matter. The Primo is going to kind of shave off at the corners just like Gen Pro does, so it doesn't really make a difference. But I don't think that's really a sliding issue anyways. Most of your pads are going to slide here, so that won't really like negate anything there. If you're buying hockey equipment and you are located in Canada and you want to support the channel, check out the links in the description to Hockey Supremacy. Clicking that link, making a purchase gives me a kickback, so it helps support the channel and I keep making content like this and doing real reviews. And finally, we get to the cool or interesting part right here, and I really wish I had GNetik V to show this off, but this is the much more shallow boot. And we have an Optik 2 to kind of show off the differences here, because the Optik 2 does have that more like deeper boot, so your foot does sit deeper in there, and as you can see, deeper channel all there. So this 36 ends up fitting like a 35 here, which is what this is, just because of the shallow boot design. As you can see, it still has that kind of defined edges, but it is much more shallow just because this piece doesn't kind of go in nearly as much as what was done on here. And I should call out, it does have the Primo on the boot area just for better durability than if it was just nylon. And this is an interesting design decision for me. And I understand kind of why Brian's is going this way. I understand why all pad companies are going this way, especially in the NHL. One, it does allow a lot more movement basically on your boot, and like on the boot from here and on your skate, just because it allows it to sit off. So your transition and like the gap, how high this sits, does change. So it does sit higher off, so you have less interference with the ice and stuff when you're dropping down. Pad seal with the post is okay. The way that the boot is flatter, your skate basically sits on top a little bit better, so you get a bit more room with that. You also have, you can kind of see it right here, that little gap added, like the leather piece that gives you a little bit of gap on the toe tie and the boot to help separate it, so you can see it kind of can hit that when your skate doesn't really get in the way. But it's nothing like the True one, where the True one's really made and flattened out and kind of like sticks out, where it attaches is easy. It's okay, it's just not nearly like, there's other companies that do it a little bit better for that, but it's pretty good. And I found myself hitting it a decent amount of times, but more often than not, like I felt my skate hitting it first, because this just isn't off that little much like the Trues. So now looking at the strapping of the pads, one of the big differences, well, this isn't the strapping, but it's a channel, just how much less this, well, more the Optik channel kind of covers and how much it kind of folds over, as you can see, compared to the GNetik. This one is kind of short compared to what this is, and it comes, this part comes a lot less low than what this does, but this is a lot thicker, so we'll get to that in a second. I asked Brian's what these little shape things here were for, and if they were for anything. I never got a response. I think it's just to mimic these, so it's nothing really there. It's just an interesting design detail, because it feels like there's a piece of foam in here to make that design have it how it is, but it does kind of match the front. Strapping on here is Brian's typical and similar, and pretty similar to the GNetik V. or it is just that one strap there, and then your knee strap that can go here or here, straightforward. Nothing a ton there. Pretty similar to what is on the Optik in terms of overall strapping. Obviously different shape, and this one does feel tighter, but I'll say why that feels tighter in 1 second. But when you get on the inside here is where you get pretty considerable differences, where you have like this pillow inside the Optik right here, which I love, and then it has this inner flap, and then it has this leg channel with just their air knit right there and nothing over here. When you get onto here, you get some interesting things, right? You get your outer channel, which has a pillow right here, which you can Velcro out. It doesn't really come out because it's sewn in, but it is Velcroable on that, as you can see. So you have that. Then you have this massive, massive pillow here. So this massive fat pillow here basically acts as even a fatter pillow than what we have on this whole combination. It's absolutely massive, and in conjunction with this, helps seal the pad, and it's like the balance on this is really good. Stability is really good and everything like that. And also this is a really solid design because this kind of ends right here. It does allow your boot to kind of, and your leg to kind of sink down, so you can get a decent push off, and like it's flexible, so it's not hindering anything or getting in the way like here. If this was kind of out more, you would kind of feel that on your leg if you ever try to angle your ankle or anything. So I like how that is there. It does offer a better mobility for that, and a pretty simple wing. And this wing definitely does feel smaller than this, but I like how there's more Velcro attachment than what's on the Optik. But the thing I don't like about this pad, and I wish they did very differently, is the strapping system on here. So my problem with this specifically is these straps are way too small. So you can see right here, whenever I do my pads up, I always try to do it so the Velcro is always fully covered. Same with right there, just so the Velcro doesn't stick on my socks or anything. And unfortunately, and it's even with this one too, I can't do it because the straps aren't long enough. So if I wore this pad like this strap was too tight, and it didn't cut off circulation, but it was uncomfortable in the lower part of my leg, and it was just overall too tight, and like I said, uncomfortable, made my legs a bit tired. Now, when I strapped it like this, it felt a lot better, much more natural, and my leg felt freer on it, and my legs were less tired. But like I said, I want these straps to be looser. They're adjustable too. They have a little piece right here where you can adjust them to make these even tighter. But Brian's, please, please, please put more elastic in here so this can be looser. A little bit of a nitpick, I don't want to have to wear the pad like that for strapping just because this Velcro is exposed, and this is adjustable, so let me adjust it.
Pad seal is okay. The thigh rise seal is not very good, as you can see, and it's because of the angled boot there, but the rest of the pad seal is good. And when you can see it like come off the ice when you lean, especially into the RVH, because of how that angled boot is. And you aren't really going to get better with Brian's unless you change how that kind of material is on the inside edge and to flatten it out. But if you got a more 90-degree boot, more on like the Optik, it's definitely going to seal the thigh more there.
So with this pillow, basically, and how it's not even a pillow, but this inner calf piece is so thick that it honestly does feel like it seals down below the shin. Really good, and honestly, it feels better than the Optik 2, which does have that calf pillow, which I absolutely love, and I love the pad for that. But just the way that how thick all of this is really does feel like it helps seal down there better, and this is one of the best pads for this. I think this does even a little bit better of a job there. With that said, the one area that's kind of annoying is these straps on here are not long enough. They're at the loosest point possible, and if I do it like this, it's too tight. I have to wear it basically like that, and this Velcro is going to be rubbing on your inside, so that's kind of annoying. So this strap definitely needs to be longer stock, and then so you can make it shorter. So kind of odd that Brian's, in my opinion, got that wrong. They're usually really good with stuff like that. But yeah, the way, like if you wear this looser and loose, this part definitely helps getting kind of shoved down there because of that pillow. And I love that feature. Where the Optik is good at it, it's just not as good as I feel like this one is. I do like their use of this Nash all the way through and this kind of molded liner right here. This did feel really soft on the shin, but again, you're not putting force onto that. And I'll mention that in a second. And it goes all the way up, and I like their detail of this. Not needed at all. This is totally not needed. It's just a nice Nash all the way through and really comfortable with their air net here. So moving on to the knee block, and we are going to open this knee block up to give you an idea of what and how it kind of works. So strap goes through right here, as you can see. Unvelcros out like that. This side unvelcros out like that, and you can see how the attachment piece works. This is
a chunky bunches of foam. All of these are very hard density foam. And when they're all loose, obviously they all kind of flop around. But when you kind of put it in place and then put this in place and then put this one in place, and here is that strap here, so you can adjust that to make it tighter or looser for this piece. But when you put that in place, it does become firmer and stiffer. Here we can see how stiff the knee blocks are. It's not like Bauer stiff, obviously, where there's no movement at all, and that is going a little bit. Same with over here. And this one is used more, but I found that this one was like, you could always move it a decent amount, but it's a lot better than what they used to be, where they could really bend. So that sewn in does help that a little bit. And as you can see on this one, it is a bit tighter too, so you have a bit stiffer. I do also like the use of the Primo all right here and not just nylons. Some companies use nylons and that's fine. I just like this because if Velcro anywhere, just like on from knee pads or stuff, I wear socks and everything, but it's just nice to have that so things just don't get caught up on things. Knee strap, obviously here, pretty simple. This comes out if you want to, but nothing crazy there. I will say this for the knee strapping, I always go here with like basically any pad that's a 36, except for this one, which I had to go here, and CCMs and Trues, I would go here on a 35 as well. When I pull knee straps down here, like on my Warrior and on my Hyperlights, because my Hyperlights are a 35, a large Bauer, not a 36, it will pull the pad up a bit. So when you strap down here, it pulls the pad up your leg and your knee ends up falling, well, lower on the block. For me, this lands pretty good in the middle of the block, so I don't need to do this and always put it right here. Personal preference thing, obviously, that's how pads work for me. One thing that I kind of want to call out, because it's odd, it does have this interesting 3D block, right? You can see this design here, much more luxurious than just this nylon and Sure Grip on the Optik 2. Now, the thing is, I don't know what it is. This feels like it should be soft and comfy, because you kind of touch this and it's like, huh, okay. It feels like it should be soft. I notice with these, I don't have the most padded knee guards. I just have Bauer 1Xs. I notice my knees hurting after using these. Not the worst that they've ever hurt, but it's not the most comfortable. The Optiks are definitely more comfortable in that sense, which is weird because this just feels like a foam and it doesn't feel like it has like this padding foam, but something about this design and this, it just hurts my knees more than I was expecting it to. I love the design. I love the idea of the 3D thing there. And it just, something about it just feels odd to me. So I want to call that out because it was a little sore and I wish it could be a little more plush. I've seen some awesome Brian's mods where they have like a big stack of soft foam that people can land on. I love that. Might not be NHL regulation, so maybe that's not why it's there, but I feel like that could be, it feels soft, but it definitely hurts more landing on my knees than pads I've used in the past. Finally, we move to the top of the pad and it does have that bindingless design right here. Same as kind of on the Optik, but the thing I do like about this is how it does have that Primo up here for kind of a wear guard. A small touch, but I do really like that just because I have noticed some dirtying and some like kind of wearing on the nylons, and you can see it kind of up here on my Optik 2s where it's just exposed nylon. This is kind of a nice touch because that would kind of give you a bit more durability back there. Not a huge thing, but it's something I wanted to call out. You do have your little knee, Brian's Pro 2 knee series guards right here to lace in, or to Velcro in, I should say. One kind of cool little touch that I haven't used in a while because I've been using the bootstrap loops is Brian's does have this nice little loop right here that you can use for their carrying straps and carrying straps in general. But I find I just always end up using this right here. So one other very cool little attention to detail on this, and I have to give full credit to In Goal magazine. They're the ones who pointed this out, and I don't even know if this is the real reason for it. I'm just gonna say it is. They said the reason for this is this little Gen Pro strip here is so if the Velcro on your knee right here gets too tight, it would hit that and could start pilling right here, or if there's any stitching here, it could kind of pill the stitching, and that Gen Pro is there for durability. So I didn't ask Brian's what this was or anything, and they said it, so I'm gonna believe them. It wasn't on the Optik 2. That is a feature that I've just seen on here, and they pointed out. So I want to give them credit for that. So we move on to weight of this pad, and I am someone who doesn't like to weigh things because I feel people get too hung up on the weights of pads and gear specifically. And pads are a thing where it's so like on your leg, depending on where the balance is and everything, the weight doesn't necessarily matter based on if your leg gets tired and stuff like that. So I think that's not important. but I will talk about how they played on me and how I felt them overall. My Optik 2s with the Max Core and the Pro Stiff Thigh, also being technically 1 inch bigger but playing the same size, are considerably heavier than what these are. These feel much, much lighter than what those do. With that said, because of that Bri core up here, when you hold this up, the balance of it and like the weight is kind of more on the thigh, and everything down here feels very light. That's not a bad thing, and I actually kind of like that. When I was using this pad, it felt exceptionally light on my leg, like down here, and it just felt natural on my leg without like pad getting in the way. It just felt really nice, and my legs weren't really tired after using them. Now, when I did strap them too tight, that made it a little bit more tired. Release that, they felt great. This isn't by all means the lightest pad on the market. It's nowhere near light as some other companies are. But one thing I did notice is my eFlex 4 pads were one of the lightest pads I've ever worn and weighed. And I was always tired when I wore them. With these aren't a super light pad. They don't feel crazy light compared to other stuff I have, but they felt very nice, very well balanced, and very light in my like actually playing. And I had zero issues using them, and I wasn't tired whatsoever. Based on the pad and like the pad fatiguing anything, they were great overall. So the Bri core of this pad, which is specifically up here, I don't know if it goes down here, but it is in the thigh rise, gives considerable stiffness to the pad basically across the face like this. So when you do this flex, it's super stiff, and that is awesome. The reason that's awesome, and the reason I really like this, and I think it's one of the reasons Brian's is listening to actual customer feedback, and I would say reviews, is because this was kind of a downfall to Brian's gear in the past. And I called this out specifically when I used my Brian's Optik 1, my Optik 2s, and my GNetik 4s, is that because this core was softer after extended use, and this was very evident on my Optik ones, basically the inner thigh after getting hit with pucks over and over again, and another thing people forget all the time is people jamming sticks in as well. This thigh basically started cratering or angling this way because of that foam would get used and kind of going like there. My GNetik 4s started to do that a little bit, but it wasn't as bad as my Optik 1, just because my Optik 1s had more use than the GNetik 4s did. Adding this core to this stiffens this up considerably and will make this pad considerably more durable, and that is a huge improvement that Brian has done, and I got to give him a huge props for that, and it's great to see that. As a comparison, this is the Optik 2 Max Core, and this is slightly stiffer as well. I felt like the Max Core wasn't quite as stiff across here as it could have been. The Bri core and the GNetik 5 is better, from what I remember, and I'll link my Optik 2 snapshot review up there of not my custom set, just the normal one, because this one is stiffer than the normal one, but that one you can see how stiff that is, and it is keeping it very straight even through extended use and abuse. I am going to also do a separate video just showing the thigh rise test on this pad to show pucks going through it in RVH and in the butterfly. But as you can see from this very slow-mo, and that's kind of what you have to do, is really, really slow-mo. The top of the pad isn't the part that's flexing in when a puck hits it, it's down here. So when a puck hits this thigh rise and it really starts to bend and kind of allows pucks to go in a few times, because that is what happened on here, especially in the RVH. It is down here, that flex down there that's happening. This one is staying relatively straight. It is getting a bit of flex in there and it is moving, but this part is the big part which is causing that to move. So in RVH, this pad didn't do amazing. It did okay. The top part was good, but down here is where that was kind of lacking a bit. It was just okay. If I was ordering this custom, I would obviously delete this flex basically and make this stiffer as well. But again, that's my personal preference. And I would be a bit worried about how that makes the whole pad just kind of feel. I'm not sure if stiffening this up will really affect the torsional flex on the rest of the pad and how it plays down here. So the big difference between like the Optik 2 and the GNetik is that torsion flex, which they say right here. Again, stiffened thighs, but you can see how like I can flex this part down and it feels like that all the way through the pad. And my knees are in the same spot, so my knee's not really getting in the way or anything. You do it to the Optik, it's considerably less. So it's not really moving at all. These are a super stiff core, like a little bit more than the Max, but it doesn't move at all. For this one, definitely does move, but the core itself is still stiff. So this won't basically end up wearing out, and like the insides, like my GNetik 4s kind of did, but my Optik 1s did, where pucks kept hitting this and the actual core would bend. Because this is a stiffer core right here, it's not going to happen, but you still have that torsional flex throughout the pad itself, and you can feel it more when you're leaning like that,
where this one, it just feels like a solid piece all the way through. This one does feel softer and it does move with you a bit more. So that's about it for this GNetik V review of these pads. Huge thanks to Brian for sending me this demo set so I can make this content and do this review for it. Hopefully this gives you a decent idea of what pad might be better for you in terms of GNetik and Optik 2. But like I said, this pad feels great. The balance is excellent. I felt really happy using it. I would happily use it more and more. I can easily recommend this pad to people. It's really nice to see Brian's listening to feedback, especially for like the durability things here. And like that attention to detail is pretty awesome, stuff like that. And like the stiffer foams used here, all stuff like that. It's really nice to see Brian's making changes like that and just making, like these are honestly almost quality of life changes, just making a slightly better pad. They didn't have to reinvent the wheel with this. Same with like the Optik 2. They have a very good core of pads and gear. Everything like works well, it feels well. They don't have to redevelop everything. So these small changes just make them slightly better and honestly, I think really nice and an easy recommendation. So if you have any questions about this, let me know below. I'll try to answer them the best as I possibly can. If you have any feedback on this in terms of how you're using it, what you felt, also leave it below. It's good to see what other people think as well. If you want me to test other gear from other manufacturers, please let them know on social media. Say my reviews or whatever really helpful, and it'd be greatly appreciated. Doing so means I might get a demo set like this. I don't want a full custom set. I don't care about that. Demo sets are awesome just so I can give feedback and talk about gear and how it plays. So it'd be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for watching this video. Hopefully it was helpful. Let me know if you have any comments or questions below. I'll try to answer them best as possible. If you want to support the channel so I can keep doing more reviews and making more content and doing like real test reviews like this with puck machines and stuff like that, check out the links in the description. If you're in the US, to Pure Hockey and Pure Goalie. If you're in Canada, to Hockey Supremacy. Clicking those links, making a purchase gives me a kickback so I can keep doing more tests like this. Otherwise, if you want to support the channel, check out Patreon, buy me a coffee. Everything through there comes right back into channel. Thank you very much for watching and take it easy.
You're watching HockeyReviews.ca.